All right, everybody, we are getting started for our show, the Safely Extreme podcast, here on Game Wisdom, where each week we examine a game design topic and discuss it with my co-host from Nexus Games, Sharky.
Soon to not be Nexus Games.
But for this week, we are beginning, I guess, a mini topic or a mini category in our What is a Game series, as we are going to be focusing on the RPG genre with three very specific genre, I guess, categories.
Yeah, I mean, this week we're covering what is an RPG, which also encompasses, American RPGs and CRPGs. And then next week we're planning on covering ARPGs, of many different styles, the JRPG style, the Diablo style, the Yakuza style, and then the next week we're planning on tactical RPGs / strategy RPGs / tactical strategy games. So it's going to be all RPGs all the time for the next 3 weeks, just all different kinds because there's just so many different kinds. But today we're talking about just RPGs, the core that spawned the other two, or the core and the non-core that's called the same thing as the core.
The core non-core.
Yeah, it's the non-core that stole the core's name.
Yeah. So,
and
go ahead.
For those who are wondering what that means is the thing we call JRPGs, well, the thing some people call JRPGs, is actually the core. That is what's been called RPGs the entire time. Like from the time they came out on Nintendo, and before that, for that matter. And then I think it was BioWare that came around in like the PlayStation 1, 2 era, and they started making quote unquote sandbox games kind of thing. And called them RPGs, and stole the name, even though they're completely different game genres, and they're very, very different. But and now people are calling the original JRPGs, which is just insulting, in my opinion, because number one, they had the name first, and number two, there's RPGs that are not made in Japan, and now people are like, well, if it's not made in Japan, it's not a JRPG. It's like,
is that like that thing that it's not called like wine if it's not from like a specific region in France or something like that?
Yeah. and the fact they call them JRPGs to begin with, is just an insult, because it's an RPG, and technically, Skyrim and, Oblivion and all those other games kind of thing that call themselves RPG are actually an unnamed genre, that are just referred to as RPGs, which is referred to wrong. But I would say, I would call them sandbox games, but, they're in this topic, so.
And there is certainly a lot, and that's why it's breaking down to three different shows. Because one of the big things that happened with the genre, especially in the late 2000s, early 2010s, was just this kind of like full-on integration of RPG mechanics into a variety of games. Char is a big fan of RPGs like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Forza, I think, is an RPG now, right?
Yeah. Because, almost after the I guess you call it the RPG Renaissance kind of thing, when there was more RPGs than there is isekais in today's anime world. After that, everybody started adopting, RPG elements into their game kind of thing. They didn't become RPGs, but everybody started adopting RPG elements into it. And then nobody made hardly any RPGs after that point, And that's when, that's also when Skyrim and, all those games started picking up.
Mm-hmm. And
So, like, I mean, the genre didn't die, but it definitely, went into recession, at least of the games that were being made in it, not necessarily the fan base. I mean, the fan base has sort of gone into recession because of default, because there isn't any games for it, hardly. There's very few actual RPGs being made
Yep,
now, and that's truly sad because that's my favorite genre.
Yep, the RPG genre, like Shark said, when we look at kind of like its major like roots in the late 80s into kind of the early to mid 90s, it was basically defined by what a lot of people call today JRPGs. The Final Fantasies, Dragon Quest, Breath of Fire, the slew of all kinds of experimental games. Again, like this was the era of Squaresoft and Enix, not to be confused with Square Enix.
Yeah, because Square Enix makes American RPGs or sandbox games and stuff. They MMOs, they're a very completely different company.
And we're not going to be confusing MMOs this week because that's another topic sometime in like the next, I don't know, like 8 to 10 weeks, depending on how long these three go. And when I guess the first, major topic we should bring up is what is the difference between the JRPG style and the CRPG style? Because they are two very distinctive gameplay loops, or two very distinctive game systems. So, when we talk about JRPGs, we're usually
the true RPG.
We're referring to games that are very much kind of, I'm not sure how I want to say it. I'm not sure if this is the right term. They're very like character driven. Like these are games where you are, as again the genre. What was that?
They're story driven.
Yeah, you are controlling a role. You are playing as Cloud or whoever the main character was from Breath of Fire. Or
you play as a whole cast of characters, not just one. You play as a whole cast.
Yeah,
and the real focus is a story. At least for the main hook,
But these games typically, or the more advanced ones like Shin Megami, Persona, a lot of the more experimental games will typically feature different game systems, something that separates it from all the other ones. So while it is, my guys go first, then your guys, we can see a very wide spectrum of elements. What's the series?
Everybody thinks that, every Final Fantasy is the exact same gameplay with a different story. And that could not be farther from the truth. Like, there's more difference between, like, Final Fantasy 6 or let's say there's more difference between Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 8 than there is from any Call of Duty to any Call of Duty. Yep. Like, you can find the most two far apart ones, and there's probably about 40 times more difference between them.
What is the series where you can kind of like affect the turn? So if you hit the enemy, you push them back on the turn meter. Was that Grandia?
Well, Final Fantasy X did that. Grandia might have done it too. I don't know. I've never played Grandia, but I know Final Fantasy X had a speed system where if you you had like turn orders based off of your speed, and then like there was moves that would delay opponents as well as moves that would speed you up. Of course, there were still moves that would speed you up in others like haste and stuff, but that was more general rather than very specific with what Final Fantasy X had.
And when we look at kind of the JRPG style, these games again are very lengthy. Expect in the golden age, expect to spend 60 to 80 hours depending upon the game itself. And
Most RPGs were 40 hours for the base story, and then if you wanted to 100% the game, 40 hours was the standard, and then the 100%ing was somewhere between normally 100 and 500 hours.
And
but
there were a lot of them.
Yeah.
And like I said, the thing about what we call JRPGs, and we'll, just to make it easier for the distinction, we'll just refer to them as JRPGs for our cast here, is that it's about both the story and learning the individual systems. Like Shark said, you could play Final Fantasy VI, you could play Super Mario RPG, you could play Shin Megami Tensei, and get 3 completely different takes on RPG gameplay.
Yep. Even if they all had the same story and the same art and the same a lot of things, if you just took the mechanics kind of thing, they are vastly mechanically different.
Yep, and don't forget something like Pokemon as well. And this is what...
Although pretty much all the Pokemon are the same.
Oh, yeah. But Pokemon is
they add franchise. A little bit more each time rather than... Well, I mean, Final Fantasy is a franchise, but, they change it up every time. Where the, Pokemon does not change it up. They just add more. They just build upon it. And, I mean, Trails in the Sky does the same thing. But I think that it does get changed up when you go to, Trails of, Zero and Trails of, Code Steel. But that's not an RPG. That's I would almost classify that as a tactical RPG. At least the Trails in the Sky one, anyway. Unsure about the others.
To Mike's question, are text adventures pre-RPGs? I'm assuming he's referring to stuff like Zork and kind of like the first generation of the adventure genre. I don't know if I would consider them RPGs, would you?
I don't know. I haven't ever played them.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
So originally, where RPGs were born from is they were actually, basically the Japanese are the ones that created the genre, and basically the Japanese seen D&D, they really liked it, and they were like, how can we do this, but, really, really different and in our own ways and in a video game? And that's how RPGs was born, kind of thing. Later, when we talk about the, American RPGs kind of thing, the CRPGs and stuff like that, Elder Scrolls and all that stuff, those are also based off of D&D, but in a completely, entirely different way.
And that's when we get into what a lot of people consider to be the CRPG side, where these games, it's not so much about predefined characters for the most part. It's more heavily based on tabletop rules. So you are literally creating your own character, and then that character is going to be used to define how the story goes. And the story will
there's not much story.
The elements that are there will typically respond to how you behave. Who do you take? Who do you kill? Do you give the money to the orphan, or do you, sell the orphan's dog to buy candy? The game will, of course, remember that. And typically...
Just like Telltale.
And the thing about CRPG design is that it's often, I think, flatter than what we consider to be JRPG. There's not as many unique systems to it compared to what we see with diversity in the JRPG side.
Yeah, like when you're talking about CRPGs, to me personally, they feel very flat and very hollow kind of thing, because they're going for where RPGs went for traditional RPGs, true RPGs went for how can we take D&D and go completely different in our own way kind of thing, and build it specifically for a video game, where CRPGs went, how can we do exactly D&D but leave out the most important role a dungeon master, because like if you play a game of D&D and there's no dungeon master, then you're just going around killing each other and doing whatever the heck you want, and just
Which incidentally, wasn't that the whole story of Neverwinter Nights? Oh no, Icewind Dale. Wasn't that just like
probably
you're just going out and killing things in a dungeon? And
probably you're just going around doing whatever you want because there's no GM to actually construct a story. No real interpersonal relationships other than stuff you decide to do on your own. And it's like a D&D game without a GM, and that's just like half of. That's not even half of the game. That's like a third or a quarter of the game. Like I just feel like it's really missing.
And the thing is, that was not done by accident. If you look at kind of like early interviews with like BioWare and I forget the other studio that worked on the Baldur's Gate. I'll see if I can look it up while I'm making this point. But what they were talking about was making an RPG that was more for non-RPG fans, of people who didn't read the entire D&D manual, or doesn't have 3 to 4 friends and a whole tabletop to set things up. And the whole idea was, can we make an RPG that basically handles it all on the back end? And what happened was, it worked. It blew up for a lot of those fans who were looking for an RPG. Oh, here it is, Black Isle Studios. And without all those elements to it. And then what we began to see, with starting from kind of the explosion of BioWare in the late 90s, was this adopting of more, like Shark says, more like sandbox, more open world style things. And of course, this is another area where the Elder Scrolls series blew up. And
don't forget Fable.
Oh yes, I'm mixed about Fable. I thought there was a lot of potential in the first Fable game, but I think the problem, and when we get to the adventure genre in this series and we talk about Telltale, I think this issue will come up there. That trying to make, the whole, all your choices matter and the world completely reacts to you, it always ends up, again, feeling very fakey to me. It feels like I'm not in it doesn't feel like a role-playing game. It feels more like an amusement park.
Yeah. A fake amusement park where all the people every ride you go on, you're just there with a bunch of cardboard cutouts. It's like an amusement park where you're the only person and everybody else is just a cardboard cutout that just responds
to you
generically to what you say.
And that's also that would also be an amazing tangent to what we saw with a lot of the early MMO games. And to Curious Mike's comment, is a game like Final Fantasy Type 0 an RPG? That would probably be more of an action RPG, which incidentally will be the second part that we'll be doing next week, talking about the action RPG genre.
Yeah, I actually haven't played Type 0. I always wanted to, but I never got to.
Mm-hmm. And the issue for me with a lot of these with a lot of that kind of CRPG style, is that it feels like the experience is so, I guess, tailored to you that it hurts the story and the world in the process.
I would say there's no, overarching story, really. It's just, interactions kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's they have the micro, but they don't have the macro. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where when you have your traditional RPGs, that some people call JRPGs, they have both micro and micro. They
micro
have
and macro.
they have the world's going to end, but at the same time, this person cannot find where they lost their keys at.
This person wants you to spend 20 minutes picking radishes in their farm for a fancy sword, or the part of a fancy sword that will then come into play like in 20 hours.
Yeah, or you have to, and it's again one of those things where the CRPGs just end up feeling hollow kind of thing because they're just missing the main part. They have the small part, but they're missing the big overarching part. And the reason why it's missing that is because there's not much a way to actually do that in a game like that without restricting your choices. And it's all about, seems like, choices in that game, but choices that don't really matter. I mean, they have consequences, but they don't matter. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't matter if you kill somebody or not. It's going to affect what happens, but it doesn't actually matter. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. The only choices that really do matter are what you choose your character class to be, or what your initial perks are. And the problem, and this is something I remember Ralph Koster, who did the it was either him or Jeff Vogue who talked about this. And the thing that they were saying that they hate is how a lot of CRPGs go, okay, I want you to define your entire build for the next 100 hours in the first 5 seconds of starting the game. Because you know how this game's going to play, right? You know every single thing. And it drives me crazy in games like that. Because I don't know what the heck I'm doing in these games. Why are you making me choose game-defining choices before the game has even loaded up? Like, I don't even know what the game looks like. And you're asking me to define what my entire character is going to be. Whereas, for a lot of JRPGs, they go, okay, you're going to start here on the skill tree, or, whatever your character is, and then we're going to unlock different choices as the game goes on. So if you want to take a character and turn them into a summoner, or to a buffer, or warrior, mage, cleric, whatever, you will do that organically through the course of playing. It's one of these
not all JRPGs have that level of choice, like when you're talking about when you're talking about like Final Fantasy VII, it doesn't really have that skill tree or anything like that. But you do have materias and being able to combo them, and you have to put those on your weapon, whether the items are linked or anything. And there's a lot of variability in there in changing how your build is. Yeah. But it's not actually changing the build of the character. It's changing the build of things that affect the character in a massive way. Where, like, in Final Fantasy X, you have the spear grid, and you have, like, 5 billion ways you can go.
Which, as like a funny aside, I think that must have been where Grinding Gear Games got the idea for Path of Exile. Is those giant skill and materia grid or whatever.
Yeah, they probably got that from Final Fantasy X. The spear grid.
Here's a question for you, Shark. Do you like that kind of progression, the materia grid? I remember it from Final Fantasy XII, that we have just like, here's 10 screens worth of choices, and you can choose, okay, I want to go to the northeast corner for fire magic, or I'll go southwest for healing, or, southeast for assassin skills. Do you like that kind of progression, or do you like more of, okay, John here, he is the assassin, and, here are all the skills assassins can get. Jane is the healer, and these are all the skills Jane can get. And that kind of design.
I like them both, honestly, because like they're all providing variants. They're what makes the games, at least one aspect of what makes the games different, and what makes them feel different, what makes them a new experience. So I'm not just playing the same thing over and over again. Like if every game was Final Fantasy VII with a different art and different story kind of thing, that would get old real quick. If you do that with any Final Fantasy, even 10, you know what I mean? If any of them carried over the exact same systems in the exact same way, and everything was the same mechanically, and it was just a different story and different art kind of thing, it would get old. It would get old real quick. So like, I'm all for changing systems, in at least some kind of implement kind of thing. Like Trails doesn't do that. Pokemon doesn't do that. There's a few that doesn't do that. But Trails has a reason to not do that because they're supposed to be one cohesive game kind of thing all the way across, which that makes sense why you wouldn't really change that up. And it would probably bring you out of the world if they did kind of thing. So like that would be a must not change kind of thing for them. And Pokemon, I mean, like, Pokemon got old for me, you know? Because it was always, you're doing the same thing with different characters, different art, and there's no specific reason other than they didn't want to invest in a different system, you know?
And, like, for me, I think I'm the same way. I like both. But the one thing that does annoy me in some of the kind of job-based designs is when you have skills that are just, like, universally amazing at the top of a skill tree. And, like, the optimal way of playing is to literally grind every character to the top of these specific skill trees. And the example that I'll give is from, and hopefully I need a breath of air before I say this, Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 1. There may be another part of that title there. But in the game, you have the characters, and they can kind of switch their different skill trees or their class at different points. And at the very, like, tippy top end of each skill tree is null that element. So you become completely immune to it, which if you've played a Shin Megami Tensei game, you know that nulling elemental damage is huge. So what I had to do, though, for the final fight was I spent probably an extra, like, 2 to 3 hours of grinding the endgame encounters so that every one of my 3 main characters basically nulled as many elements as I could, and it just made that fight ridiculously easy. And of course, again, I know somebody will say, well, you didn't have to do that. But as anyone who's played these kinds of RPGs know, well, half the fun is the story, the other half is breaking the game's systems using the tools they give you.
Yeah. That's the one system I don't like, is not necessarily exactly what you said, but the basis of what you said. And that's the job system to where, you know, you have these restrictive bubbles, but then you can change from different restrictive bubbles. You know, I don't care for that. You know, like, either give me a set, just, you know, bubble kind of thing, and it's just locked to that, or give me just a free roaming. I don't like the semi-restrictive. I prefer totally restrictive or totally free, you know, but the you know, semi-restrictive kind of thing where you're restricted, but then you can swap kind of thing to a different restricted kind of thing, that just gets really grindy and really messy kind of thing, where when you have the, you know, you can go anywhere kind of thing, it's like, you know, it gives you all the same benefits of that, but it's you know, you get to pick what you want kind of thing. You can go and fill out the whole entire spear grid in Final Fantasy X, but you could also just go and get, like, certain aspects that are close to each other kind of thing, and be happy with that kind of thing. And, like, it's more freeing kind of thing, you know, and the, you know, the totally restricted is more freeing too, because it's like, I just need to max out this and then I'm done kind of thing, you know, and then, like, every character has their own, and that's more freeing in its restriction kind of thing, where the semi-restrictive kind of thing just, you know, it feels like it makes you have to do every single one of them all the way to max. So it just feels really bad to me personally.
Yeah, like, I remember, what was it? Well, this is semi-off topic, but in the Tactics Ogre game for the PSP, that they did that very same thing with, you know, every character can spec into every class or every job, But you have like those, anyone who's played these kinds of RPGs know that if you can like max out a job where you get to a certain point, you get a permanent passive that you can attach to another job. So of course, the high level play is we're going to spend 5 to 10 hours, let everybody do everything to get every passive, and then create the ultimate warrior. And the problem with this is that there's that you don't have to do it, but that temptation is always there. It's that same thing with the Hoarder Syndrome, and like the whole hoarding syndrome in video games has pretty much originated from the RPG genre. I can't use my all-party, full heal, recover all mana skill now, because what if I need it 15 hours down the line?
Yeah, and then I end up playing the entire game without using a single item through the entire game.
Oh, yes.
Which is the reason why in my tactical RPG that I made, in 2018, released in 2018, I didn't include an item system. Mm-hmm. And I did research into the item systems, and what I discovered is item systems are really hollow for the most part, when you're talking about this kind of thing. Because when you look at them, they consist of three things. They consist of, different mana potions of different levels, different health potions of different levels, which I mean, a Phoenix Down would technically be a health potion kind of thing. And like, basically key items and useless items, ingredients kind of thing, just stuff that isn't strictly gameplay kind of thing. And that's it, so like, random crap, health potions and mana potions, and that is it. And I was like, holy crap, is that all there is? All these games with like hundreds and hundreds of items kind of thing, and that's all it is across all the games. Like, I did research into this, and I was like, what? That's crazy. How can that even be, that way? But it is. So, when I was researching to do my remake kind of thing, I was wanting to put an item system in there. I was wanting to sort of put an item system in the first one, but I couldn't get any ideas for something that wasn't health potions and mana potions, which I know why now.
Yeah.
But when I was doing that, I went and I was there are buffs and debuffs, but most of the times those are spells and not items. I think a few games put those as items, kind of thing, but very, very few. But like, I wouldn't, I was like, well, what can I do to actually create some unique items? So, like, now I have a bunch of really unique items for the remake when we go to that is going to really change what the things is. Well, cures for debuffs is technically healing, so that would be technically a healing potion of a different sort. That would just be a different type of healing potion.
Yeah, and the thing about, like, to forward something about buffs and debuffs and cures and stuff like that, one of the issues, I think, with the rigid nature of JRPG design has been, again, the more choices you give the player, and this could also be true of CRPGs, the more the game has to accommodate them. And when the game doesn't, it always feels like there's an issue with that design. Like, if you remember from the original Final Fantasy, they give you all manner of debuffs. You have, I think, poison, slow, stone. I think there's something that raises attack or raises speed, lower speed. And then you get to the boss fights, and they are completely immune to everything. So if you build your party as a full debuff squad, guess what? You're screwed, because you can't use any of them on them.
Yep. And I've always hated that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The reason why they do it is to keep the bosses from being a pushover.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they shouldn't be putting systems in there that makes the bosses a pushover kind of thing. They should be putting systems in there that still, will give you different tools, but do not make them a pushover, you know. And that may be the fact that they made the debuffs too powerful, you know.
Yeah.
Which, you know, would, but like if you made it less powerful, then it would be pretty useless for common enemies at that point, and then like necessity for the bosses kind of thing, and you just have this issue there, and you know. A different solution, probably a better solution, would be have it where like certain bosses have like certain strengths and certain weaknesses to where they're, you know, like, you know, you have a golem boss or something, and the golem boss is of course immune to being turned to stone because he's already stone, you know. He's immune to sleep because he's not even alive, you know.
Yeah, the thing that I liked about the Shin Megami Tensei games is that they basically say you can use every debuff on every boss, and we hope you do that or you're going to be in deep trouble. In Persona, what was it, 4, I remember for the true optional final super difficult boss fight, my whole strategy was I just put the lower accuracy debuff at the highest level on her every other turn. And even though she was hitting a character with his weakness, it never hit him because she kept missing. And I just beat the final boss that way.
Yeah, they made it where the debuffs were required, or that other way, which I don't think is the best way, but I think it's better than just making them immune to everything. I think selective immuneness would be probably the better route.
Yeah, I know Etrian Odyssey does that to some extent. That's more of a party-based RPG, or more of a squad-based one, or dungeon crawler. And what they often do is you can hit a boss or a mini-boss with a debuff, but once you hit them with it, they build up partial immunity to each play of it. So if you keep trying to poison them, or you keep trying to blind them, they'll eventually become immune unless you use a skill that kind of resets their resistance to it. And it's an okay system, but the problem is that it's not really conveyed in the game. If you know the series inside and out, you learn how that works. But the game doesn't exactly come out and say, okay, if you use poison 3 times in a row or blind 3 times in a row, you won't be able to do it a 4th time during this fight.
You know what? That doesn't sound like a good system for an entire game, but that sounds like a good system for one particular boss. Like that's, you know, like a robot boss like Ultron or something that adapts every time you hit him with an attack, you know, and then like there is no reset. Just you have a limited amount of uses, and then he's just like, no, that doesn't even affect me anymore. I've grown, I've adapted. I know your strength. I've adapted to that, and now I'm no longer weak to that thing.
So here's a question for you, Shark, and for the audience watching live or recorded. What is your favorite, I guess, unique RPG system? As in, what's an RPG game that had like a unique way of playing, a unique combat system, a unique skill system, whatever, that really caught your eye?
My favorite system in, you know, unique systems in RPGs has to be, you know, the speed system in Final Fantasy X. Just, I love the way that, you know, you have the preview for the turn order, everything's based off of speed, you know, then you have all, you know, several moves that delay enemies, as well as you have attacks that delay you, kind of thing, that deals more damage. You have like when you summoned with Yuna, that took a while, so it was you know, it delayed her by quite a bit, you know, but like when you could use like delay hit, which you typically got on Titus right at the, you know, near the start kind of thing, because he started over in that area and on the spear grid, and like you could take him and just, you know, like that guy's about to attack, hit him with this delay hit, and now he's moved like 3, you know, slots back, and now we're going to be able to kill him before he gets his attack off, you know. Or, Titus' quick hit, where he was able to, again, you could get that in anybody on the spear grid, but Titus started in that area, where you could hit really quickly and just get another turn just like that. It was just, bam, bam, bam. It was the sort of like quick attack in Pokemon, but, actually quick, unlike Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
Where Pokemon has the same amount of turns kind of thing. It was like a real quick attack. But like the time manipulation in there. And I know there was another game that did something similar to that. I forget the name of it. It was that really beautiful looking pixel art game that we did billboarding in a 3D environment.
Star Renegades?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That game had its own issues that I didn't like, but it used a similar timing system kind of thing to, Final Fantasy X. I'm sure that was the inspiration for that timing system.
Yeah. For me, I like JAWS systems too, Foreign. I think some of my favorites, I love The World Ends With You. Like, everything about that design, how you can make battles harder or easier and get more rewards adjustingly or accordingly is a really great one. I still think the Resonance of Fate is probably one of my favorite combat systems just because of the sheer insanity of that one. It's a turn-based RPG where you have bullet time and gun fu that you have to use to kill bosses with.
Now, I have a question for you in chat.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your favorite minigame in RPGs? Because RPGs are known to have a lot of minigames, and I'll start it out. My favorite minigame would have to be in Final Fantasy IX, which is definitely one of my least favorite Final Fantasy games. But the mini games in that was just so on point, like just all of them, And I especially, Triple Triad too. Triple Triad is, I think Triple Triad is less of a mini game and more as a full game, since I'm currently working on Triple Triad based.
Never heard of that game before. What's it called?
Neon Continuum, Just join the Discord and you can play it, Like, Triple Triad is more of a full game, but but it's not technically because, like, I'm making it, but, the full game version of it. But, like, I really did love the, definitely really love Triple Triad, but, I really love that's the obvious answer. But the unobvious answer is I really love the mini games in Final Fantasy IX, with the especially the, like, hot and cold game with the chocobos. I really, really enjoyed that.
I've always been a fan of, like, building towns or restoring castles and, like, having, like, the castle provide as, like, a backup for your characters. I think Suikoden may have done that at one point, or one of the Suikodens.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, anything... I guess as another, like, aside of a favorite system of mine that I'm surprised no one else has done... Oh yeah, and Dark Cloud, yeah. I played Dark Cloud 2, but I never finished that one. But yeah, like, I always like having that kind of town structure that you kind of supports the combat and the combat supports the town kind of thing. It's one of the reasons why I loved Hinterland by Tilden.
That wouldn't really be a mini game. That would be a secondary system.
Some games do that, although some games will have like a basic system of that. I think Bravely Default 1 had that, or it could have been Xenoblade, one of those two, where like the town will build up in the background, then every time it unlocks more items for you to buy or more skills and things like that.
I think Xenoblade Chronicles was like that, but not Xenoblade, not the original Xenoblade. Which, I love the original Xenoblade. Not so hot on the Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yeah. And that's when we start talking about stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles, Final Fantasy 12, And even more contemporary examples, like the Witcher series, for instance, that we begin to see kind of like that bleeding in of action elements into
But,
RPG design.
well, no, there's games that came before that, way before that, and
But
those are just action RPGs.
yeah,
Because like Star Ocean has always been an action RPG, and Star Ocean existed way back in the day.
yeah.
I don't remember when the first Star Ocean was, but I remember my favorite Star Ocean to the End of Time, came out around the same time as Final Fantasy VII. And but that was like, I don't know, probably like the 6th or 7th Star Ocean game. So like, and it's always been action RPG. So like that's been there probably since like, Nintendo days kind of thing. Like, so like action's already, has blended in with the RPGs, forming the action RPGs for a very long time. And Final Fantasy 12 is less an action RPG and more of a single player MMO, which I hate it. I hate it with a passion. Like if I could get a flamethrower and burn every copy of that game, it would make me feel better.
And like games like The Witcher, like what we saw kind of a modern CRPGs turn into, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Witcher 1, 2, and 3. Like those kinds of games, I think we'll probably save those for next year, right? You think they would fit more in the ARPG side of things?
Which games was that again?
Stuff like Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and The Witchers.
The Witchers for sure. I'm unsure about the Fallouts.
Like the Fallouts are like kind of like they're first person, like you shoot and you attack.
Wouldn't those would probably fall more into the first person shooter side with RPG mechanics.
Kind of hard to tell. Like that's where that weird split began in terms of like RPG design. When games began, the difference between a game that is an RPG versus one that just simply adopts those systems.
Yeah, because that game is first person shooter first.
It really is hard
RPG
to tell.
Second.
And with a lot of these games, like in terms of the CRPG side, one of the reasons why we really aren't spending as much time on it as we are with the JRPG side is that, again, their systems are very much flattened by the fact that they're trying to let you do everything.
And they're all the same, too. Pretty much. Because, like, it's just, how many ways can we let you do whatever the heck you want, And that's just what they all do, kind of thing. So they're all doing the same thing. I mean, the mechanics themselves on how they let you do it is different. But it's are you going to skin a cat with a razor, or are you going to use an electric shaver? Like it's all doing the same thing. You're shaving a cat, but which way are you doing it, kind of thing. And the way really, in a lot of ways, doesn't matter. We're with the RPGs, you're doing totally different things in totally different ways.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that to me has been a negative of both specific genres. That when combat just evolves into, okay, you beat this enemy using skills X, Y, and Z. Now do it for, 30 more hours repeating the same strategy every single time. And this is why for a lot of JRPG style games, it becomes more about the systems at that point. Figure out, okay, if I'm supposed to win like this, how can I break the game to make that completely easier? Or, how do I make the most optimized version of that strategy?
You gotta love Final Fantasy X when you get trapped into the when you get captured and your Titus, Riku, I think it's Titus, Riku, and Waka get thrown into the pool kind of thing, and then you've got to go fight the undead dragon kind of thing. And that boss is so hard. You fight. You're like, if I only had a summoner, if I only had Yuna with me, if I had anybody, like else that had the skills, to beat this guy, but I don't because I'm locked to those three characters, and that is bosses both probably one of the hardest bosses in the game to fight, as well as one of the easiest. Because all you've got to do is take a Phoenix down and throw it on him, and he's instantly dead. Because he's got zombie, and you bring him back to life, and he dies.
Like the train in Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's always great to have like those elements in there that lets you, circumvent the game or, break these encounters in a way that it works in your favor. And we can see that it's, again, one of those reasons why, like, buffs and debuffs are oftentimes, reduced in terms of their effectiveness. Because if you can just, make the boss miss 100% of the time, well, there's your strategy for every fight.
Yep. And just to let you guys know, I was too much of an item hoarder to use a Phoenix down, so I did things the hard way and beat the dragon straight up.
Mm-hmm.
That was a task because that thing was quite powerful.
But yeah, it is when we talk about CRPG design, oftentimes the problem for me with these games is that once you've figured it all out, oftentimes the story just isn't strong enough to carry your interest in it.
Yeah. We're, with the RPGs kind of thing, your traditional RPGs, they as you play, like the story keeps on hooking you to come forward, kind of thing. At least if they did a good job, which Final Fantasy 13 definitely did not do a good job. Their entire story is there's one plot twist. The bad guy is actually a good guy. You know everything you need to know. That's it. That's the entire story. Spoiler warning. We're like with like every Final Fantasy made by Squaresoft, not Square Enix, kind of thing. Like for example, if the good guy is actually the bad guy, kind of thing. That's just one small blip on 15 different 15,000 different blips that you're going to encounter, kind of thing. I mean, you did encounter that, like, in Final Fantasy. I mean, you encountered that in Final Fantasy X because, Jet. I'm not going to say anything more. You encountered that in Final Fantasy IV because your main character, I think there's a couple others that you encountered that, but that was just one small aspect of those stories, not the entire story, which is what was in Final Fantasy 13, because the person who wrote Final Fantasy 13 couldn't write his way out of a paper bag.
So, I guess, as another question, we've talked about how many skills there should be in a game, or you don't want to give the player everything and anything that they can build their characters around. So, do you think there is like a hard limit in terms of just how many choices you can build a character around, or you think it is really more, it depends on the game itself?
It depends on the game itself, because if you build a game to have all these choices and builds, and then you build the game around that kind of thing, then if you balance properly, then the two are going to mesh well together and it's going to fit well together. Where if you just go all in on one side and the meshing doesn't happen, then yeah, you're going to break the game in some way. You're either going to break the game as a make the game way too easy to break, where if somebody takes the normal route, the game's going to be moderate, and then if you try to break the game, it's going to be like the easiest thing you ever played, or like impossibly hard, to where if you don't break the game to the not nth degree kind of thing, then you're completely screwed. You're never going to make it anywhere. kind of thing. And,
Yeah.
you got to have things meshing together. So, like, the meshing together is the important part, not too much, too little kind of thing.
Yeah. So here's speaking about that. Here's another question for you and for the chat. When it comes to defining classes or skills, whether it's a CRPG or JRPG, do you prefer games where character skills are very much rigid, as in, okay, this character will only get healing skills and nothing else. This character will get all your backstab skills and nothing else. So that if you're going to build a team, you must take this one healing character or you're screwed. Or do you prefer like having these skills kind of be more mixed in? So let's say the warrior may have a self heal, or the archer may be able to provide a smaller heal for the party. So you're not always required to take, class X, Y, and Z.
Well, I think requiring that would be bad, but
Mm-hmm.
I do like it both ways because Final Fantasy VII does it the restrictive way, to where
Mm-hmm.
Eris is your healer, and but you're not required to take her at any point, except for on specific story missions where she is required, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the same time, you have heal materia that you can pop onto anybody and turn them into healing through the materia, kind of thing. So there's ways to overcome it if you need it, kind of thing. But at the same time, you can go through fights with no healing and still win, even boss fights, kind of thing. Not necessarily all fights, but there's many of them, because like there's some bosses in there that if you heal at all, the boss is going to screw you over completely. The strategy is do not heal. Healing is the last thing you want to do during this boss fight. So you absolutely want to avoid healing like the plague. So like they have that in there, like enemies that will punish you for healing, like healing isn't necessarily required, and you can, when you get out of that exact combat, you can heal up, kind of thing, and like some games, just have it to where, in my last game, have it to where once you finish a battle, you auto heal when you exit, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And healing in the battle isn't necessarily important. I mean, it can be, depending on how the game works and everything. But like, I do like also, characters that have more utility, because like I don't want like single use characters, kind of thing. And you also see that in like Final Fantasy, kind of thing, when you have the material that you can swap out and you can change how people work. You can give, and like especially when you have all the like node attachments where you can like take a sword, you can take a fire element and take a element blue spear, kind of thing, and attach it, and now you have a fire sword. And then you could take out that fire that element one and now put it all in there, and now you have a fire attack that attacks all your enemies, but it's just magic and it's not actually affecting your weapon. And there's like so many different thousands, millions of combinations you can put in there. And like you look at Final Fantasy X, they have like a lot of stuff that is very, very different, but can still, do the same thing, because you're able to customize Yuna into learning black magic. You can customize, Titus into learning, armor breaking. You can customize Waka into learning healing magic. There's all different ways you can adapt them. So like, but that's in your build itself, not just straight up configurable like it is in Final Fantasy VII. And this is what we were talking about earlier, about every system being really wholly unique, kind of thing, for the most part. And having some kind of utility in your characters is a good way. But there's also points where you don't want utility, kind of thing. like in my last game, it's not technically an RPG, it's a tactical RPG, which is not this topic, but in it, you don't want necessarily rocks doing a ton of damage against papers, because paper beats rock, not rock, paper beats scissors. But there is something a new move or a couple moves I am planning for the remake to give them a little bit more utility, but it's not in the same way because it's elemental. Mm-hmm. Because, while I have the rock, paper, scissors, I also have a fire, wind, water in their game, because like scissors is water, you have the tsunami of blades, and like rock is fire because it has like the Armageddon with the flaming rocks, and it has all kinds of other stuff, and like paper is wind because paper tornado and all that other stuff. And I plan on implementing specific elemental ones that are going to go in the reverse order kind of thing, because like you think about water on scissors, what is that going to damage the most? Is that going to damage the rock most or the paper? It's going to damage the paper most. No, it's going to damage. Well, it's going to damage both of them, but
So, I think for me, I think utility works really well. That you can have these predefined roles or predefined strategies: healing, buffing, debuffing, range, melee, whatever. But you give characters different flares of those systems. I think it makes things a little bit more deeper. And the example that I always turn to is Etrian Odyssey. That in the game, in the first game, there was one healer. There was your medic. If you didn't take the medic, you weren't going to get any healing abilities whatsoever. But when going from 2 and onward, what they would do is have different ways of healing that were class dependent. So one character who was the buff debuffer, one character was the buffer, and you can, whenever a character gets buffed, this character can also auto heal. While another character who also does debuffing, their special ability was anytime they debuff an enemy, everyone in the party heals. And of course, you also have the default mate or default medic, who is just your pure healer. Like, they could just heal your entire party up in one go. But by spreading out the utility of healing, it meant that you weren't always required to take a healer. Or because characters could have different elemental abilities, you didn't always need to take the mage class. And I thought it made things far more interesting in terms of party builds.
Yeah. And that's one thing I always hated about D&D, because like when you play D&D, you pretty much always need somebody to play a cleric. And cleric is like the most boring thing you can possibly play because you can't do pretty much anything
except heal.
But heal,
And that's what that whole term, the RPG Holy Trinity came from. That you must always have, a rogue / glass cannon, you always need a healer, and you always need the warrior / tank. And if you don't have all 3 of those points in your party, you're screwed. And I think we have seen games kind of get away from that, at least in the past, I would say in the past decade, maybe even more than that, of trying to do their own thing or trying to be a little bit different. Now,
but you can be set and still have the utility at the same time, because it's you can have set characters with utility in other ways. You can customize them. You can also have a build system where you can spread into multiple areas, kind of thing. The freeform kind of thing. There's many different ways to add utility while still having set characters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In set roles, and it's not necessarily utility straight built in, but rather flat built in. But then you can add the utility based off of what you do and how you configure things.
Yeah. So
strategy.
As a time check, we are over an hour into the discussion. So
Did you find it boring for it?
Is
I
there
was often the cleric, and I hated it.
is there anything else regarding JRPGs or CRPGs that we haven't touched on?
Uh, we we definitely missed some very famous games
Mm-hmm.
like Chrono Trigger, which is pretty much regarded as the holy grail of RPGs
Mm-hmm.
because every famous RPG designer worked on that game.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing about, like, JRPGs is that they can have multiple endings to them, but they're always multiple endings to the plot itself. Whereas in a lot of CRPGs, it's, here's the good ending, here's the bad ending, and that's about it.
Yeah, where
I,
regular true RPGs have can have many different endings and you know based off of but like we don't see too much of that. I
mm-hmm,
mean, we see more of that in tactical RPGs than we do, you know, regular RPGs
mm-hmm,
because like series like Disgaea, My
mm-hmm,
Game Chromasia, Final Fantasy Tactics, and like several other games like really, have a lot in that. But like when you talk about traditional RPGs, there's not too many that really take advantage of it. The I mean, even like action RPGs like Star Ocean really take
mm-hmm.
advantage of that a lot because like they have like character based endings. Where like if you build your relationship really high with these two characters, you're going to get one of their endings, kind of thing, at
Mm-hmm.
the end.
And I think speaking about games like Star Ocean and kind of like the settings, one of the things that I think I've always wanted to see more of, and it's always been harder to do, is more contemporary or modern style RPG. Stuff like Earthbound, what was it? We could maybe argue something like Undertale in that respect, as opposed to just either pure fantasy or, pure science fiction, that kind of thing.
Mm.
But again, it becomes a lot more challenging because of the fact that you're trying to, again, with RPG design. Oh yeah, and of course Yakuza Like a Dragon was fantastic. Is that it
Which
becomes
will be
hard?
coming up in a future topic.
Yeah, it becomes hard to, I guess, get everything working. Again, the brilliance of Yakuza is that the main character just thinks he's in an RPG, and therefore he's in an RPG. So if I think I'm
Yep.
in a Souls like, does that mean my life is a Souls like?
I mean, you never get good,
Mm-hmm. And you gotta
so
go the
you
masochistic
are in a
route.
Souls way.
There we go.
And yeah, Yakuza will be a big focus point in the next topic.
When we talk about more action-based RPGs.
Yep.
So, I think with that, I guess to wrap things up from my point of view, and now I'll throw over to Shark, that when we look at kind of how much the original RPGs have evolved from JRPG to CRPG to where they're at now, it's really about figuring out the kinds of systems you want in your game, and then the best ways to expand on that. Now, what's a very interesting kind of change is that, again, as we talked about before, most RPGs in the 90s and early 2000s were 60 to 80 hours, maybe 40 to 60 hours minimum, just to see through things with the pacing and all that. And I think today, a lot of developers have shied away from that. That people, I think a lot of people don't want to spend 100 plus hours in a single game. Unless,
Well, I
of
mean,
course.
40 hours was the standard, and
Mhm.
40 hours is still pretty standard, but we're getting away from that in some of the regards, kind of thing. Like,
Mhm.
like the Trail series is cutting it down to like 30, 25 hours kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
a lot of indie games are cutting it down. You know, like when I was making Chromasia kind of thing, like I was so afraid that there wasn't going to be 40 hours of content. I was like, am I going to get roasted alive for not being long enough? You know, I was afraid of that, honestly.
yeah,
And then turns out that, you know, shorter's better,
yeah, and
today's market.
and that's kind of a very weird thing for me is that I really fell out of love with the JRPG genre. This was, I think, 98. No, I think Final Fantasy 9. Like, when I was playing that game, I just hit this point. I was like, I don't ever want to play another random battle ever again in an RPG. I kind of completely stopped playing them for, I think, a good, like, 6, 7 years. And
Yeah, Final Fantasy 9 is one of my low points on the Final Fantasy scale. But I love their minigames.
and for me, like, I've gotten really tired of fighting as a form of padding. That if you're going to make me fight, then I want that
interesting.
Yeah, make it interesting, make it impactful, and give me adequate rewards for it. Don't tell me, okay, you won this fight, you must now fight 600 more times, and then you'll get the level up, or then you'll get the skill that will make things better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the reasons why, like, a lot of, like, the quote-unquote, like, mobile RPGs, that I find that I grow a little bit, or I find I grow tired of them. I love setting up party dynamics and building them out like that. But then you tell me, oh, you don't have the right SSR or 5-star character, so either spend money or grind your scrubs for the next 10 hours, and then you'll be able to do this.
Yep.
And
they have psychological in there, but that's a different topic.
Oh, yes. And for the CRPG side for me, again, I think the lack of interesting systems just kind of does that genre in for me. That I'll play a Skyrim or I'll play a Fallout, I'll go, 20 minutes, and now I'm like, okay, this is great and all, and that's it. That is the complete extent of that gameplay loop. And I often don't find the story engaging enough to drive another 30, 40, 50 hours of exploration.
Yeah. When I play those games, it's like, it's not like I don't find the story engaging. It's like, where is the story? I'm not finding any story. I'm just finding NPCs that say stuff, and give out quests. And like I feel like that a lot of them fall into the fetch quest kind of thing. And that is like the one thing I really hate in normal RPGs.
Wait until we get to the MMO genre.
Yeah. The MMO genre is fetch quests the game almost. And, in theory, everything behind the MMO genre says I'm going to really like it. But I really have not found a single game that I do not dislike with a passion.
But I think, yeah, and that's true too, Foreign. But I think, like, my final point is that I think we're seeing more indie devs who are approaching RPGs or RPG design that are trying to A, experiment with it more, and B, try to remove some of those frustrating aspects of it. And that is certainly...
But the issue with indies tackling RPGs is RPGs are pretty large in scope. And they can get out of hand very, very quickly. And when I built my game kind of thing, like, I built it specifically to minimize the heck out of the scope. Rock, paper, scissors, we're only having 3 different types of characters, no 20, 40 different types of characters, and then 20 or 40 different, 100 different enemies kind of thing, types of enemies. Like I put a end on that. The fact that there's only set maps rather than building out an entire world means that I don't have to get all kinds of art assets for that. The fact that I only have to worry about stuff in combat instead of really so much stuff out of combat, drastically cut down on the number of systems and everything. And like, I really built that in a way to minimize the heck out of the scope. And it still took us 3 years to make it. Technically 2.5, but.
Well, I think that's all the points that I want to make for today. So I'll throw it to you, Shark. What do you have to kind of take us out with for RPGs?
Stop calling sandbox games RPGs. Call them CRPGs. Call them sandbox games. Call them something. They're not RPGs. Skyrim's not an RPG.
Wait, Call of Duty's not a JRPG?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. The thing people refer to as JRPGs, that's RPGs. Everything else, not an RPG. And just because it was made in Japan does not make it an RPG. Because if that's the case, anime's an RPG. Manga's an RPG. Like the place where it comes from doesn't matter. What matters is the genre, and the Skyrim genre is very, very different from Final Fantasy, which is one of the ones that started the RPG genre. So they're not the same genre. And let's see here. What else do I want to say? RIP Squaresoft. I miss that company. I absolutely hate Square Enix with a passion. Let's see who else I can piss off.
And tell, here's my point. Tell Nintendo to finally bring Muller 3 over here to the United States.
Oh my God, they need to do something else. They need to bring back freaking Mario RPG. Not the non-Mario RPGs, the Paper Marios and all that. Bring back the actual Mario RPG.
Put Geno in Smash.
I don't think they can. Because that was in teamwork with Squaresoft, which Squaresoft doesn't exist anymore. And Square Enix probably has the rights to it, but if you work with Square Enix, it's just going to be a completely different game. It's going to be a single-player MMO or something, called...
When I do the editing for this, I should put Geno's theme for the entire background of our cast.
Yeah.
That won't get me in trouble with Nintendo or Square Enix, right?
Geno is one of those characters that he just came out of nowhere and he was just awesome. I love Geno. I wish they put Geno in other Mario games, but they probably can't because of Squaresoft / Enix / Square Enix now.
All right.
I think that's about it.
All right. So we're going to end things for this week's episode. Thank you for everybody watching this live or recorded. Be sure to tune in for our next episode where we're going to be focusing on the action RPG genre with all the Diablos, Yakuzas, Witchers, and more that go with
Our Oceans.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure to lick the smash button and smash the like button on both Josh's channel as well as my channel. And join my Discord and come and play Neon Continuum. Links to mine and Josh's Discord, mine and Josh's channel, all of our Twitters, all that stuff is down in the description of both of our videos, as well as in my video. I'm not sure about Josh's. There's a link to the previous cast. How late are you?
You're very late.
You're about what, 30 seconds before the end?
Mm-hmm. You're the JRPG protagonist, like, getting to fight the final boss after doing everything else.
No, we already beat the final boss. This is just the credits rolling.
Yeah. Yep, and if you want to catch these shows live, we do them Sundays at 4 p.m. ET. And if you are a developer wanting to submit a game for us to look at for in the inquiries, we are still taking submissions, so please get in touch about that.
Which we are reformatting that show, but we're still definitely taking requests and everything.
Oh,
and
yes.
also, Chris, watch the VOD.
There you go. Enjoy your football game as well.
Yeah.
All right. So that is going to do it. So again, tune in next week for our action RPG discussion, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until our next show, have a great rest of your night.
See ya.